For years, the automotive world has operated like a closed system. Big manufacturers build the cars, collectors buy them, and influencers, they usually stay on the sidelines, reviewing, reacting, or modify within limits. But in recent years, one name has started to break that pattern in a way very few expected. Matt Armstrong, a content creator who didn't just stay behind a camera, but stepped directly into the world of high-value, heavily engineered, and often untouchable supercars. And recently, something he did has sparked attention across the entire automotive space. Not because it was illegal, not because it was destructive, but because it challenged the way expensive cars are treated after damage, ownership, and restoration. And that's where things start to get interesting. Because in the luxury car world, perception is everything. A car is not just a machine. It's a brand statement, a controlled image, a carefully protected reputation. But Matt Armstrong has been doing something different. He takes damaged, sometimes nearly written-off performance cars, and brings them back to life in a way that is not only watchable, but deeply technical and surprisingly transparent. And that transparency is exactly what's shaking things up. Not panic in a literal sense, but attention, discussion, and in some cases, uncomfortable questions being asked inside the industry. Because when a creator can take a crashed supercar, rebuild it in public, and make the entire process viral, it changes a narrative that manufacturers usually control. It takes a story out of the showroom and puts it in the garage, under LED lights, with real tools and real mistakes. And audiences love it. But brands, they have to think differently. Because now, a single creator can show what usually stays hidden: repair complexity, parts sourcing challenges, engineering compromises, and the real cost of restoring modern performance machines. And that brings us to his latest move. Without needing any dramatic announcement, Matt Armstrong's recent content direction has leaned even deeper into high-value rebuilds and complex restoration projects. Cars that are not simple fixes. Cars that require serious engineering understanding. Cars that were never meant to be casually rebuilt in a home garage environment. And every time one of these projects goes live, it does two things. It educates the audience, and it indirectly challenges the automotive industry's traditional storytelling. Because here's the reality most people don't think about. When a car is heavily damaged, especially something expensive or exotic, it usually goes through a very controlled process. Assessment by insurance manufacturer-approved repair routes, authorized part systems, and often, in many cases, total write-off decisions. But when creators like Matt step in, they demonstrate something different. They show that end of life, for a car, is not always the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a different kind of journey. And that idea alone is powerful enough to shift how people think about value, repairability, and even ownership. Now, let's be clear. Car manufacturers are not sitting in offices worried about YouTubers. That's not how this works. But what is happening is more subtle. The content is influencing public perception. And public perception influences everything from resale value expectations to repair expectations to brand transparency discussions. Because when millions of viewers watch a damaged performance car get revived step by step, it changes one simple belief: that these machines are fragile, untouchable, or only fixable by official systems. Instead, the audience starts to see these cars are complex, but not impossible. And that shift is what makes the content powerful. It's not just entertainment anymore. It becomes a kind of unofficial education system for automotive repair culture. And Matt Armstrong has become one of the most recognizable faces in that space. But with that influence comes attention, not just from viewers, but from workshops, engineers, and industry observers who are now paying closer attention to how modern cars are being repaired outside official networks. Because today's vehicles are no longer simple mechanical systems. They are highly integrated digital machines with sensors, ECUs, coded parts, and manufacturer lock systems. So when someone rebuilds them outside traditional pathways, it raises real technical questions. How far can independent restoration go? Where's the line between repair and replacement? And how does modern automotive design affect long-term repairability? These are not dramatic questions, but they are important ones. And that's why content like this spreads so quickly. Because it sits right at the intersection of engineering, entertainment, and real-world economics. And that's exactly why Matt Armstrong's latest projects are getting so much attention. Not because they are shocking, but because they're relatable in a way luxury cars usually are not. People don't usually see million-dollar engineering broken down into step-by-step rebuilding. They see polished ads, finished products, perfect showroom lighting. But here, they see bolts being removed, panels being replaced, engines being revived, mistakes being fixed in real time. And that transparency builds trust with audiences, even if it challenges how the industry prefers to present itself. Now, what makes this even more interesting is the emotional side of it, because every rebuild has a story. A damaged car is not just metal and carbon fiber. It represents loss, recovery, and in many cases, a second chance. And audiences connect with that narrative deeply. That's why these videos don't just get views. They get watch time, engagement, discussion, debates in comment sections. Some people admire the skill. Some question the feasibility. Some compare costs. And some even get inspired to try similar projects themselves. That ripple effect is what makes creators like Matt Armstrong important in the modern automotive ecosystem. Not because they replace manufacturers, but because they add a new layer of transparency that didn't exist before. And whether the industry fully embraces that or not, the audience already has. So when people say his latest move is forcing car brands into panic, it's not about literal fear. It's about attention shift. It's about narrative change. And it's about how the definition of value in the car world is slowly evolving. Because today, value is not just about price tags or badges. It's also about story. And few creators are telling that story in real time the way he is. As the automotive world continues to evolve, one thing is becoming clear. The line between manufacturer-controlled storytelling and independent creator-driven storytelling is getting thinner every year. And creators like Matt Armstrong are right in the middle of that shift, not by trying to challenge the industry, but by simply showing what happens when cars leave the showroom and enter the real world again. And that, more than anything else, is why people are watching so closely. Because it's not just about cars anymore. It's about how we understand them. And that understanding is changing one rebuild at a time. And as this space keeps growing, one question becomes harder to ignore. Where does it actually lead next? Because what started as simple rebuild content has slowly turned into something much bigger. It's no longer just about fixing damaged cars for entertainment. It's becoming a full-blown documentation of how modern performance machines behave once they leave factory-perfect conditions. And that is something the automotive world has never really had before at this scale. Traditionally, once a car leaves a manufacturer, the story becomes fragmented. Some cars go to collectors, some go to repair shops, some disappear into private ownership. But now, creators like Matt Armstrong are keeping that story alive in public view. Every bolt removed, every part replaced, every unexpected issue during a rebuild all becomes part of a larger narrative that thousands, sometimes millions, of people are following in real time. And this changes expectations. Because audiences are no longer satisfied with just seeing a car at its best. They now want to understand what happens when things go wrong. And more importantly, how they can be fixed. This is where the impact becomes more visible. Not in headlines, but in behavior. More people are becoming interested in restoration projects. More viewers are questioning repair costs. And more discussions are happening around whether modern cars are truly reparable in the long term. Even outside the automotive community, this shift is noticeable because the content is not just about luxury vehicles anymore. It's about problem solving, engineering, patience, and persistence. And those are universal themes. But there's another layer to this story. As the content grows, so does the complexity of the builds. And with complexity comes challenge. Modern supercars are not designed like older mechanical machines. They are deeply integrated systems, electronic, software-driven, and often dependent on manufacturer-specific diagnostics. So when a creator attempts to rebuild one of these machines outside official channels, it naturally raises the difficulty level significantly. It's not just about replacing broken parts anymore. It's about understanding systems that were never intended to be fully dismantled and rebuilt in a non-factory environment. And that is exactly why audiences are so invested. Because every project becomes unpredictable. Every episode carries uncertainty, and every breakthrough feels earned. This unpredictability is what keeps viewers coming back. They are not just watching a repair. They are watching a problem being solved step by step, often with real setbacks along the way. And in a world where most content is heavily polished and predictable, that kind of raw process feels refreshing. It feels real. But with that realism comes responsibility. Because the more influence this type of content gains, the more it shapes how people perceive the automotive industry itself. Some viewers begin to believe that all cars are easier to fix than they actually are. Others start to question pricing structures, repair policies, and manufacturer decisions. And while discussion is healthy, misunderstanding can also grow if context is missing. That's why the best creators in the space naturally balance entertainment with education. They show progress, but also explain difficulty. They show success, but also highlight failure. And that balance is what keeps the content grounded. Now, coming back to Matt Armstrong's impact specifically, what stands out is consistency. He has built a format where every project feels like a journey rather than a quick transformation. And that journey is what audiences connect with the most. Because people don't just remember the finished car. They remember the struggle to get there, the unexpected issues, the problem solving, the decisions made under pressure. That emotional engagement is what turns regular automotive content into something much more powerful. And it's also why discussions around his work continue to grow, not because of controversy, but because of curiosity. Curiosity about how far these rebuilds can go. Curiosity about what's possible outside traditional workshop systems. And curiosity about how the automotive world will adapt to this new kind of transparency. Because whether the industry fully acknowledges it or not, the way people consume automotive content has already changed. It's no longer just about horsepower, speed, or design. It's about story, process, and authenticity. And that shift is not slowing down. In fact, it's accelerating. So when people talk about Matt Armstrong's latest move, what they're really talking about is part of a bigger transformation happening across the entire automotive content space. A transformation where rebuilding is no longer hidden work. It is content. It is education. And for millions of viewers, it is entertainment. And as long as that continues, this space will only keep expanding, with more complex builds, more ambitious projects, and more attention from audiences who want to understand what really happened behind the scenes of the cars they admire. And that is where the future of this content is heading. Not away from the industry, but deeper into it, one rebuild at a time. And when you look at the bigger picture, one thing becomes clear. This is not just about one creator. It's about a shift in how automotive content is being understood globally. For decades, car culture was controlled by brands, dealerships, and official media channels. They decided how a car should be seen. They decided what stories were told. And they decided what was worth showing. But now, that control is no longer absolute, because audiences are no longer waiting for polished campaigns or showroom reveals. They are watching real-world rebuilds, real damage, and real recovery stories unfold in front of them. And that changes everything. It creates a new type of trust. Not based on advertising, but based on transparency. When people see a damaged supercar being rebuilt step by step, they start to understand a machine differently. Not as a perfect product, but as something mechanical, complex, and fixable under the right hands. And that understanding is powerful, because it brings cars closer to people again. Even expensive, high-performance machines that once felt untouchable suddenly feel more human, in a way. Not simple, but understandable. And that is where the real impact lies. So when people say Matt Armstrong's latest move is forcing car brands into panic, the reality is much more subtle. It's not panic. It's attention shift. It's narrative change. And it's a realization that storytelling around cars is no longer limited to the people who build them. Now, it belongs to everyone who can show the truth behind them. And as long as that continues, this space will only grow stronger. More rebuilds, more discoveries, more unexpected challenges, and more people watching every step of the journey. Because in the end, it's not just about fixing cars. It's about understanding them in a way that was never possible before. And that is exactly why this story is far from over. And as this entire shift continues, something even more interesting starts to happen behind the scenes of the automotive world. Because while viewers see entertainment, the industry sees data. Every rebuild video, every restoration project, every breakdown and repair process being shown publicly is quietly building a massive library of real-world information, not just about cars themselves, but about how people interact with damaged vehicles, which parts fail most often, which repairs are cost-effective, which systems are more complex than expected, and which cars generate the most interest when they are brought back from the edge. This kind of information used to stay inside workshops, insurance companies, and manufacturers. But now, it's visible to everyone, and that visibility is changing expectations on both sides. Viewers are becoming more informed than ever before. They start understanding that at a total loss, car is not always completely destroyed. Sometimes it's just economically complicated to repair. And that difference is very important, because it reveals how much of modern automotive decision-making is not just technical, but financial. And this is where creators like Matt Armstrong unintentionally become part of a bigger conversation, not just about rebuilding cars, but about questioning how the entire system defines value. A car that is declared too expensive to repair by insurance standards might still be perfectly rebuildable in the right environment. And when audiences see that happening repeatedly, it naturally leads to deeper questions. Why are some repairs considered not worth it? What defines repair value in modern vehicles? And how much of that decision is influenced by systems rather than actual damage? These are not simple questions, but they are becoming more common. And the more these rebuilds are shared, the more those questions spread. At the same time, there's another layer developing quietly, the emotional connection. Because these videos are not just technical demonstrations. They often follow the story of a car that had history before it was damaged, a car that someone owned, a car that had personality, a car that was involved in an accident, written off, or abandoned. And when that car returns through a rebuild process, it creates a kind of emotional satisfaction for viewers. It feels like restoration, not just of metal and parts, but of identity. That emotional angle is one of the biggest reasons this content performs so strongly, because it's not just about watching something being fixed. It's about watching something being brought back. And that feeling is universal. But as this content grows bigger, it also starts influencing other creators. More channels begin focusing on rebuilds. More garages start collaborating with online creators. And more audiences begin expecting transparency in automotive storytelling. This creates a new ecosystem where content is no longer just entertainment. It becomes a form of public technical documentation. And in that space, accuracy and authenticity matter more than ever, because audiences today are not passive viewers anymore. They compare, they research, they question, and they engage deeply with what they see, which means every rebuild project carries weight. Every decision shown on screen becomes part of a larger discussion, and every outcome influences perception. This is why the impact of creators like Matt Armstrong continues to grow, not because they are trying to challenge the industry, but because they are simply showing what happens when curiosity meets real engineering. And that combination is powerful, because it bridges the gap between professional automotive systems and everyday understanding. It takes something complex and makes it visible, not simplified, but accessible. And that is what keeps viewers returning, because each project is not just a video. It's a journey through uncertainty, problem solving, and discovery. And in a digital world full of fast content and short attention spans, that kind of long-form storytelling stands out. It holds attention not through hype, but through progression, step by step, problem by problem, solution by solution. And that structure is what makes it addictive to watch. So as this space continues to evolve, one thing becomes very clear. The automotive world is no longer only shaped by manufacturers. It is also being shaped by creators who show what happens after the factory, after the showroom, after the accident, after the moment a car is considered finished.